I've always wanted to be a creative person. There's something innate, and I think in a lot of us, where we want to create something. I mean, as I was a kid, I remember printing off tabs and trying to learn how to play the guitar. Music and movies, books have always been a big part of who I am, but I've always just felt like, okay, well, I'm just an appreciator. I guess I can't do it myself. So in a way, Discovery Deadlift is like scratch that creative outlet for us. For when I say for us, for my wife as well, but especially for me. Um, I've always been interested in that world, and I've always liked to think of myself as a creative person, but I hadn't ever really ventured and done anything super creative other than like write some terrible short stories that no one should ever see. But I think that kind of gets at the heart of that self-consciousness, of that vulnerability that comes with like creating something or putting yourself out there. I think that that's been a learning curve for me because I didn't have a lot of experience or reps doing that.
My good friend and sometimes Choose the Hard Way guest host at Blake of Today introduced me to today's guest, Clay Cooper, aka at Discovery Deadlift. Find him on Instagram and TikTok. Clay is a dad and husband with a regular job who also happens to be a hugely successful creator and mental health advocate. And his content combines two things he loves: being in nature and deadlifting. Clay lugs his Olympic bar and rucks his plates out to the middle of nowhere and deadlifts, while pretending his wife isn't standing there with the camera, making him look extra epic and badass while he stares off into the distance. And he does it for a very specific reason. In 2020, Clay's dad passed away. He had a new child arriving soon, and his lifelong depression and anxiety intensified. Clay wanted to do something to help himself and to share it with the world as a way to demystify stereotypes about depression and anxiety. So he started the Discovery Deadlift Project. Clay's goal is to help people embrace their passions and the idea that doing difficult things can transform us into the most mentally and physically strong versions of ourselves. That's been the goal of Choose the Hard Way since I started it in 2018. So I knew I had to have Clay on to talk about how he got started, what he's learned during his journey, and where he's headed. Everyone has a struggle you can't see, even if they seem strong, happy, well-adjusted, surrounded by friends who love them, stacking fat racks, smashing it at their job. There's probably something going on that you just don't know about. Dealing with depression and anxiety is hard enough. No one needs to feel an extra layer of shame and guilt on top of that. Yet somehow in 2023, that's still a pretty common experience for many people, especially guys. In my book, anything that helps normalize the conversation around mental health is a good thing. And that's why I'm especially excited to share this conversation with Clay with you. If you're struggling with depression and anxiety, know that it can get better, and please reach out to a qualified mental health professional. If that's not an option available to you, talk to a friend you trust. And if you're lucky enough to not be dealing with depression, anxiety, excessive stress, then pick up the phone and call someone in your life just to say hey, to grab a coffee, or to go do a workout. Just listen and be there. Little things make a big difference for the people around you, and that difference can be you. You can find Clay on Instagram and TikTok at Discovery Deadlift, and you can find that link in the show notes. If you're new to this show, thank you for listening, and please like, subscribe, hit 5 stars, and leave a review wherever you listen so more people can find the inspiring and motivating stories that my guests like Clay share on this show. Choose the Hard Way is a podcast where guests share stories about how hard things build stronger humans and the fun they have doing it. Sign up for the newsletter at choosethehardway.com to get exclusive stories about the hard way, a behind-the-scenes look at what you hear on the podcast, episode updates, and more. You can find me on social at Vance and at HardwayPod.
In between like calls and emails, I went and got like a PVC pipe, and I had 2 backpacks that I filled with rocks from my backyard. And I was like trying to do like shoulder presses and squats with them. And it, of course, slipped off and it hit the ground really hard and it knocked out the light from the basement. And my wife came upstairs and said, "Hey, just find some weights. So I bought some weights, and then it was the garage stuff for a while, and I still just felt like this mounting anxiety, and it was an anxious time for everybody. But yeah, when I went outside one day, it was more than anything to just kind of get out and get clear. And then when I played the video back because I was recording myself lift, I was like, oh, that's actually really it's really beautiful. So it evolved from there where that first lift I drove and unloaded the weights from the Subaru and just lifted lakeside, and it's evolved into a much more like arduous hard thing because some of the locations aren't accessible with a vehicle. So the hike in the ruck has kind of been the evolution of it.
So many questions based on that answer. So I'm going to start asking you a
Sure.
lot of questions.
Sure.
The first question that I have is you described being anxious during that period of time, as a lot of people were. This is a super common thing. Had you experienced anxiety or depression, anything else in your life in a significant way prior to that point in time?
Yeah. I think anxiety, I would classify it as anxiety up to that point. I think, as I've lived longer, I've realized that it's, coincided with bouts of depression. But ever since I was a kid, I was fairly anxious. I was that kid that would worry that like when my parents left that maybe they wouldn't come back, or like if I go over on a sleepover, I'd like call my parents late that night and be like, hey, you should probably come get me, because I was just anxious that something bad would happen to the people that I loved. And it was that way for a long time. I played basketball in high school, and I used to get really anxious before games to the point where it was probably beyond like normalcy. I would have a hard time eating, and I just get so stressed out. So becoming a father kind of moved that into hyperdrive because I felt like, okay, now I'm responsible for this little human, and now these two little humans, and how do I be there for them and take care of my own mental and physical health so I can relate, so I can get through life. But anxiety has definitely been something that's been a part of my existence as long as I can remember.
When did you become aware that the feeling that you had was something that would be described as anxiety versus, hey, I'm Clay and this is just the way I am, and maybe I think all people are like this?
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful question because that inflection point I think is something that a lot of folks go through, that like self-discovery. For me, it was the birth of my son. So I was 26 and my father had died. He had kidney failure. So I was actually lined up to be his kidney donor. And it was a really difficult thing. My father was a hero of mine, a really wonderful man, and I had positioned myself to be able to give him one of my kidneys. So I thought, like, hey, dad's going to be okay. He's going to have one of my kidneys. And then he just got so sick that it wasn't possible, and he passed away. Right before he passed away, my wife woke me up one morning with a pregnancy test and said, hey, I'm pregnant. So there's a couple week period there before he passed and when we knew we were expecting, um, where I was just kind of going through this period of, you know, maybe this isn't just me being me. Maybe this is something more. And then when my son was born, I tell people it's maybe a strange thing to say, but I was flooded with this huge sense of love, but also simultaneously like realizing, oh, I had this protective instinct that was almost kind of scary. Like I had this capacity to stop anyone that would try to hurt him in a way that uh, caused some pause. And with that came anxiety because everything, if my anxiety rolled out of control, I could see everything as some kind of potential threat to harming my boy or my wife and our family. So I think becoming a father helped me realize that, like, hey, this is maybe a disorder. And it still took like a year or two after that before I actually went to therapy for it, thanks to the love and patience of my wife to kind of help me understand it.
How did you make that decision to seek out a therapist, and what was your process like?
Um, I think, my wife she's a huge part of that. I think we just had conversations, and, I've like the media that I've taken in through the years, right? Like I would be one of those guys that I didn't think had any stigmas about anybody going to therapy. I'd be like, oh, you should go to therapy. Yeah, it's great for you. But then in my mind, it was like, oh, but I probably don't need it. So I was still stigmatized internally. And I think just getting to a point where I was having a hard time making it through my day to day without just feeling really nervous. I was having a hard time focusing at work, and ultimately just said, "Hey, I think I think maybe I should talk to a therapist. And I think it was just through a Google search in the area around me. So I found somebody, and she was near my home at the time, and just started speaking with her.
And Clay, where are you based? Where do you live right now?
So I'm in the suburbs of Salt Lake City. So it's a town called Saratoga Springs.
And among your community and your friends and your family, is going to a therapist something that's common or normal?
For me, it wasn't really common or normal. I think that, and it wasn't. No one was there to. I think, like, if I told anybody, I didn't really have a situation where I was shamed or people raised their eyebrows, like, "Oh man, you're crazy." But I think I didn't know a lot of people growing up that went to therapy, and yeah, again, my introduction to therapy was like watching Tony Soprano talk to Dr. Melfi, on The Sopranos. So I think that. Um, yeah, there are lots of there's been lots of positive traction, I think, just in the world and in our country, and even in this local space where I think it's much more normalized. But for me, it kind of felt like I was taking a step into the unknown because no one in my family had really done it.
Yeah, Clay, I'll just share a bit about my experience with therapy, if you don't mind, because
Yeah, of
I
course.
think conversations like this are great because I think they can normalize how people think about these things. If it's something that's not currently in their sphere of consciousness, I moved to Los Angeles in 1997, and I was there until uh, towards the end of 2009. Prior to that, I didn't have a high degree of awareness of therapy, probably other than seeing it on television. But living in Los Angeles, working in a creative discipline and being around a lot of creative people, and not that therapy is just for creative people, but what I discovered in Los Angeles was in my peer group, everyone had a therapist. It was a super normal thing. Everyone
Right.
talked about it. So that was how I initially ended up going to therapy. I was going through some stuff, and one of my friends was like, "Hey, I see this therapist. She's great. You should give her a try." So I ended up going to that therapist. Fast forward, a couple of decades, the advice that I give people now, if they're just beginning on this path, because as you noted, you can go to Google, you can go to other places, you can go to Psychology Today, you can go to your insurance provider. They have pretty comprehensive lists of.
Right.
I was just having this conversation with someone last week, but what I recommend to people now, if they're just starting on this path, is number one, if you have insurance, try to find somebody who's in your network. Try to find somebody who you can get a first degree recommendation. Like if you have a friend or someone in your network who has a therapist, that can be really useful. And then I also this is something that I find a lot of people don't do, particularly if they're just entering into exploring therapy for the first time, because I think it's a pretty intimidating thing,
Yeah.
particularly if people carry some stigma about it. But I really recommend that people reach out to 3 to 5 therapists who they think might be a fit, and then call them and talk to them because it's someone you want to feel some rapport with, right?
For
So,
sure.
I mean, I'm just sharing a bit about what I've found to be helpful and useful. But thank you for sharing about your experience. But I just want to put that out there for anybody who's listening and may not have done this before, might be therapy curious, as many people I think are. Just it's a normal and okay thing. And if you have the privilege of being able to afford it or have access through healthcare, you should feel totally okay about taking care of yourself and going to do that.
Yeah, I co-sign everything you said, Andrew, and that idea of talking to multiple therapists too. I think it's it maybe feels like dating at first, right? I've had a couple of different ones, but you find somebody who that you can feel like you can be especially vulnerable with. So I think that the my most recent therapist, I have a friend who's a therapist, and he said, "Hey, let's go therapist shopping in my network." And we brought up a few, and he said, "Hey, I think you'd be a good fit with this person." So it's really privileged that I had that kind of connection where I had somebody who could direct me to somebody. And yeah, the first time though, it was a little scary because I just Googled it and saw that she was nearby, and she turned out to be great. But I've had friends and family that have had to, try a few different therapists out just to basically say, hey, who can I feel comfortable or who can I feel a connection with where I can be myself?
So you start seeing a therapist, you're starting to explore what's going on with yourself with this anxiety. And for people who aren't listening, you're a pretty jacked dude, or if they haven't been to your Instagram, have you always liked picking up heavy things?
Um, no, so I grew up playing sports. Like I was always involved or active. Basketball was my favorite sport. I played football. I played baseball growing up. Um, but kind of along the same lines of like understanding that my anxiety was more significant of an issue. I talked about that inflection point with my son being born and being like, oh, this protective instinct kicking in. And like, it's really like I don't know, innate. I started lifting weights a little bit more aggressively as, the months after my dad passed and I was preparing to be a dad myself. So, and in my, fitness, I guess I'm going to say the word journey. I hate the word journey, but my fitness journey is basically, started kind of with like a split of like a bodybuilding split where it was like, oh, I'm going to work bis and tris today and 3 sets of 10. And ultimately, it evolved over the last 10 years to where I found myself in about 5.5 years ago in a gym with an empty deadlift platform. And at that point, I had been lifting long enough and started to supplement with food and protein and creatine to the point where I was like, oh, okay, I can move fairly good weight. I walked up to the deadlift platform one of these times. No one was there, so I didn't feel as self-conscious, and I pulled a really ugly deadlift. I didn't know what I was doing, but it kind of unlocked something in me a little bit where powerlifting, that world kind of opened up a little bit. And that pursuit of strength has been something I've been chasing for a while now.
And prior to that, when you were doing more of a bodybuilding split, and I ask this because I am not a bodybuilder myself. I never have been. As a journalist, I did write about Jay Cutler, who was a multiple time
Yeah.
Mr. Olympia. I wrote about him after he'd finished second, I think, 3 times. So that was the angle of the story of what's it like to be perpetually second place. But I have to ask, when you were going through that phase, were you hitting the calf raise machine?
Yes, I the calf raise machine. There's this T-shirt that I need to get. It says "Team No Calves" and it's a flamingo.
Mm.
Um, but yes, I was hitting the calf raise machine, and it's funny because I I lift legs about twice a week, and sometimes that'll include calf raises. Mostly it's back squats and front squats. But I think the most common refrain that you'll get on social media is "Dude skipping leg day," or "Look at the dude skip." And yeah, I was hitting the calf machine. I still hit the calf machine now, and my calves are just my calves, I guess.
So let's go back to that moment. You're in your backyard. You somehow source weights at a time when it's almost impossible to get weights. I don't know if you went to the Play It Again Sports or like, what did you do? How'd you get them?
I had a classified ad that came up. My wife found it. We were watching TV the night before, and she said, "Hey, this guy has some weights listed in his garage, this older guy in a neighboring town." And I remember feeling we were really anxious about going and getting them because it was at the onset of the pandemic, and we didn't want to have any contact with anybody. So I called the guy and I was like, "Can you leave it outside of your garage?" And he left it outside of his garage and he like wiped it down with Clorox wipes. And I like walked over and dropped the cash underneath the door and he counted it and then I loaded it up and left. So it was actually really fortuitous because it was right before there's a point in the pandemic where people were like charging crazy amounts for like weightlifting equipment, like barbells and plates and dumbbells. So I got it for a pretty good rate. And it was just this haphazard collection of plates. And then I had a friend who said, "Hey, I have an extra barbell you can use." And yeah, I got lucky. And a lot of those plates are still the plates I use today.
And when you got the plates home, did you put them in the microwave to decontaminate them?
Yeah, yeah, it was like one of those situations where, uh, no, I think he had wiped him down, and I told my wife, I was like, "Listen, he wiped him down." She's like, "Okay, but just to be careful." She had the Clorox wipes out there, so
Yeah.
it was a brave new world or a scared new world. We didn't know what was going on. We were still wiping down our groceries at that point.
And you get the weights home, and as you mentioned, you lifted and you also recorded yourself. And this is something I'm really curious about is was recording your lifts to check your form? Is that what you were doing? Has that always been part of your routine?
Yeah, yeah, especially with the deadlifting, because I think and there was probably like some semblance of like, oh, look how much weight I can lift. This would be cool if I could play this back and watch it. But Mostly it was focused around the idea that the deadlift, there are certain cues that you want to hit, and technique and form will keep you safe, but also increase the load that you can move. So I took to the habit of recording myself lift so I could hate watch it later and be like, look at you, what is this, And when I played it back, obviously down by the lake, I was like, oh, well, damn it, that's actually really beautiful and serene. And I remember driving back from the lift. There was a herd of deer that ran across this dirt road, and it just felt very like peaceful. And that's kind of what I was after. And I called my wife and I just said, hey, she's like, where are you? What are you doing? And I was like, well, I took the weights out by the lake, and I guess this is who I am right now. And she laughed and said, okay, and was a support from the onset. And yeah, so I started going and I showed her the footage, and she's like, yeah, you should record these. So I started recording them, and then loaded a couple up on Instagram. And when I was going by myself, I was just have a haphazard, little tripod that I put my phone up there, and I wasn't really worrying about framing or cinematography or anything like that. It wasn't until she started joining me that she was like, hey, why don't you just do the lift? And she's pretty artistic, and she was able to, film it from a different lens.
Does she have a good eye for deadlift form at this point?
She does. I think she does because she's that poor person has had to watch me deadlift so many times. I've told her she can deadlift herself, and I was like, hey, you're a better looking person than me. Maybe we should have this switched around. And she's just like, no, you're the show horse here. She's very shy. So
After you threw that first video up, what were your expectations of what was going to happen? What were your intentions? And when did this become like an actual thing in your mind?
I threw the video up, and like the traction that I got felt like it was significant at that time. I had maybe a couple hundred followers on an Instagram account that had been existing where I just recorded some of my lifts, kind of with the idea of like, hey, if anybody sees this and wants to send over some supplements, help subsidize my protein or creatine or something along those lines. But I can't remember the exact amount of like engagement that it received, but I remember it was higher than what I was used to, which makes sense because it was kind of strange. And then the questions I was getting were like, hey, what's this about? And I was like, yeah, I've just been dealing with a lot of anxiety lately. And I kind of just found myself down by the lake today lifting. And the conversations that it spurred they were helpful. They were conversations where it kind of helped me contextualize what I was going through. So after that first post, I think I went and lifted the next day and actually took my son with me, and then it just kind of kept going from there. So it pretty quickly became like, okay, this is a discovery deadlift.
Was there a point when you hit a step change in the magnitude of engagement? And did it happen on Instagram or did it happen on TikTok or both?
Yeah, for it started, I hadn't put on a TikTok for like TikTok came later, so I started on Instagram. And I remember waking up one morning and I'd had like, at that point, I'd gotten like 800 new followers or something like that, which was huge for me. And I was like, oh, what is going on here? And I realized that another Instagram account that had a significant following had like taken hold of my account and they had reshared it. So that kind of was the first, like, if the point where I was like, oh, this is growing a little bit. And I think it got me over like around 1,000 followers on Instagram. And then there's just been successive points afterwards where, something I'll put together or post will go viral. I mean, I had a video watched 40 million times recently on Instagram, which was just, after that point, it's just kind of insane. And I'm like, there's no way I can uh, pay attention to these notifications. So I'll just let it ride the wave. And that usually translates to additional followers. TikTok was really fun though, because my friends were like, hey, you should throw your stuff on TikTok. So I'd thrown a couple on there. And then I did this lift up in the mountains one day and it was snowy. And I threw it on there with a Childish Gambino song. And I did not think anything of it. And I didn't even like check TikTok very regularly. And when I came back, it had been viewed like 30,000 times. And for me at that point, I was like, this is insane. Like, I was like, I'm going viral, baby. 30,000 felt huge. And yeah, it just kind of spurred from there where there's been other videos that have gotten into the millions. And yeah, it's fun. It certainly is fun. But I think it's also kind of stressful in a way too, because I'm somebody who, like, if somebody is saying something like, kind or has a question, I want to be like, oh, hey, thanks for watching. I try to want to respond, but on some of those, it's not really possible to get to all of them.
Do you have a background in content creation or marketing?
No, I'm a supply chain professional. So I think, Andrew, I think I've always wanted to be a creative person. Like I like there's something innate, and I think in a lot of us where we want to create something. I mean, as I was a kid, I remember printing off tabs and trying to learn how to play the guitar. Music and movies, books have always been a big part of who I am, but I've always just felt like, okay, well, I'm just an appreciator. I guess I can't do it myself. So in a way, Discovery Deadlift is like scratch that creative outlet for us. For when I say for us, for my wife as well, but especially for me. Um, I've always been interested in that world, and I've always liked to think of myself as a creative person, but I hadn't ever really ventured and done anything super creative other than like write some terrible short stories that no one should ever see.
Maybe they should. Maybe you should enjoy them.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'll send it. I'll send it over to you, and you can tell me. You can be like, "Hey, lock this away and never let anyone see it."
It could be could
Or
be great. We don't know.
yeah, yeah. Or you could say like, but I think that kind of gets at the heart of like that self consciousness of you've been in the creative space, right? Like you're a creator, and that was the world that you were in. I think there's probably more second nature to you for that vulnerability that comes with like creating something or putting yourself out there. I think that's been a learning curve for me because I didn't have a lot of experience or reps doing that.
When you made this transition from thinking of yourself as somebody who's consuming things, who maybe in the back of your mind has this desire to be someone making stuff and putting it out in the world, and then suddenly you're doing it, and you're doing it at a very large public scale. When did you become aware that, okay, now I am this thing, I am a person making stuff, and there's a high degree of interest in it? And did it change how you approach what you were making?
Yeah, I think my mother-in-law lives in Florida, and we had a couple Discovery Deadlift T-shirts printed off, and we sent her one. And I think it was my brother-in-law or her were at the gym, and somebody walked up to her and they're like, "Hey, Discovery Deadlift, I love that guy," or something. And they like called me and they're like, "Hey, I was in the gym in Florida and I was wearing your T-shirt." And I was like, first I was like, "Stop it, that didn't happen." And then they're like, "No, it really did." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." So I think there's a couple of times where people have reached out. I had a coworker recently tell me that their friend found out that they worked with me, and they're like, "No way, can you get him to like look into something for me?" And I was just like, "Oh, I hope you told him I'm just a boring bald dad and that I'm not that cool." But I think as the traction and the following has increased, like the pressure, it doesn't feel like work to me because I still like sincerely love hiking and deadlifting outside and seeing new places. I think if it started to feel like work, then I'd have to reevaluate it, but it doesn't feel that way. It does probably increase like my desire to create more quality content though, or like, maybe that's just refine the craft a little bit to get a better shot or work on the editing a little bit, or even as a deadlifter to just get stronger and improve my technique. So I think that, it informs my ability to want to get better across the board, but it hasn't, thankfully, it hasn't like changed how I feel about the core process in and of itself. And it hasn't changed the fact that when I go and hike and deadlift, it really is a peaceful, thing for me where I can go get some respite.
When you think about what the aesthetic of Discovery Deadlift is and what a video needs to look like and which shots it needs to have, because you have a very distinct style at this point, what are some of the conscious style or artistic decisions you're making? And like what has to happen when once you've lugged everything out there? I'm just thinking about you. Like, I don't know, like you're walking up for the fourth time with the bar because you didn't get the wide shot quite right. But like, what has to, which shots do you have to get?
Yeah. So thankfully, my wife kind of directs a lot of that. So a lot of the time, I can just bring the weights out, and she does her thing where I'm hiking and I'm stopping in between, and like I'm cursing if it's really tired, if I'm tired or if it's hard. And, it just feels like an organic situation. So when I'm loading the bar all the way to, whatever the working sets are that day or whatever, I'm trying to have finished, there have been times where she's been like, hey, I want you to hit one more set. Let me try something different. And maybe I've gone a set beyond what I was going to, or two sets beyond. Or she's been like, hey, do you have one more pull in you? I just want to get a shot here with your feet in the plates. So, but in the most part, it's a fairly organic process. We have kind of fallen into this like creative collaboration where I know where she might want me to be at different times. And it's just kind of an unspoken thing. The editing process, the music that's selected or like the pace of the video, I try to capture how I was feeling at that time because there are sometimes I'm going out there and I just listen to Run the Jewels or something and I just want to lift some heavy weight and I don't want to talk about my feelings. I just want to feel strong or something. And usually like with the editing or the final product, I'll try to transfer that kind of information across to say like this is how I was feeling. And if something was more contemplative or it was longer or it was harder, I don't know. A lot of times it's kind of like what's been on my playlist recently, and it can motivate sometimes the shots. Also, the speed with which she has a gimbal on the iPhone, so it's really funny if people would see her. I mean, people don't usually see us because we're not in populated places, but she's sprinting back and forth, and sometimes she's going slow, and yeah, it all just kind of comes together in the end. So she shoots and films everything, and then I edit and put together the final product.
And so at this point, you've been to more than 180 unique locations, 10 different states. There's a lot of time and effort going into producing these videos. And I think that's also with social media in particular, people don't always understand what's going into producing these cool videos that they're getting to consume. How much time goes into each video end to end, do you think? If we take the travel time out.
If you take the travel time out, so it's just the hike and the lift and the post-production stuff, it's probably 4 to 5 hours. Maybe a little bit more than that, just depending on some locations are more accessible than others. Some I can pull up in the truck and others, take multiple phased rucks to get to. So I think 4 to 5 hours would be a good average.
And
taking out travel time, drive time.
Right. And has that been a positive force in your marriage? I guess to ask a very personal question, but it sounds like you and your wife have this creative collaboration now that sounds like it's a new and different thing that you started doing with this project. You're out there working together. And for anybody out there who's been part of this is kind of a professional creative collaboration. There's sometimes constructive conflict in those collaborations, and you're spending a lot of time together, right? And kind of a work capacity in addition to your marriage capacity. So what has that been like for your relationship to do this project together?
It's been, overall, like in the aggregate, I think it's been really positive. I mean, we've been married for 13 years, just about, and we have a really good marriage, and we basically always just really liked each other. It doesn't mean we don't get on each other's nerves or I don't say something stupid sometimes, but I think sometimes there is tension that can come because you get to a location and the sun's setting and you're trying to set up and I'm like, okay, I want to get a lift in. And like, recently, and she does not do this very often. And, if she was here, she'd be like, let's talk about the things that you forget to do. But she didn't hit record on a big set. So I had just pulled like 515 for reps. And I was just like, and it was towards the end and it was after a ruck. And I was like, hey, I think and she's like, I didn't record that. And of course I was like, well, damn it. And she, ultimately we laughed that stuff off because again, to kind of go back to that equilibrium or that nucleus of why we do it, like filming it and sharing it is an awesome byproduct. I really do believe that we like it so much and we like what's being created together. Like we'll watch it back enough that even if there wasn't the substantial audience that we have, that I like to think that we'd still continue to do it because it's informing something creative within us. And, I think making something together that we can both be proud of has helped us grow stronger together. I mean, that probably sounds like a cliche, but we already, really like each other and love each other. And I think Discovery Deadlift, and we bring our kids along too, has been something where, we kind of all get out there together. And then at the end of the day, we'll get home or we'll get back to the camper or hotel or wherever we're at. And we're just like, we did kind of a wild thing together today. Not a lot of people do this. And it's kind of fun to take that accounting.
Does it ever feel like a drag?
I mean, there's been times where I've been like, what the hell am I doing? Like there was this location that I wanted to hike some weights to, and in between dry heaving and realizing that I just bit off more than I can chew, I was like, okay, I was like, I don't feel peaceful right here. But it's interesting though, at the end of that one, I felt like a huge sense of accomplishment because after about 4 miles, I was like, we did that. Not a lot of people are able to do this. And, this is the Hard Things podcast, right? Um, there is reward and virtue in doing something that's hard. So even if sometimes it feels like a drag, at the end of it, usually if I'm feeling like tired or beaten down, I haven't had a situation or circumstance where I was upset that I did it. More often, I mean, basically every time I'm glad that we had the experience.
Clay, I need to know more about that location. Where was it? What specifically was hard about it? What was different than the 179 other locations?
I think that this one in particular it was in the Wasatch National Forest. So it's in this accompanying mountain range here in Utah. And it was hiking towards this overlook. And it's funny because there had been wildfires in the weeks prior to it. So like it wasn't like we couldn't really see the beautiful valley below like you typically be able to see. So we laugh about it now because it was really hard to get to that overlook. And then when we got there, it was pretty smoky. But I think it was just long, and there were lots of inclines and declines, and it was really windy once you got out onto like kind of the outcrop. The wind was just blasting, and my lips and hands were getting dry, and it was just yeah. I think the overall length, and then just I do it in phases, so I take that first phase there, and then I have to walk back, and then walk with the second phase. In between, the distance was long enough that I was just as I was walking back, I was just thinking to myself, "Oh man, I gotta do this. Like by the end of this, I'm gonna have done this like 12 times." So I think it was just maybe the headspace I was in, but I think more than anything, it was just the length and the air quality wasn't great.
How do you find your locations and how do you scout them?
Yeah, some of it's word of mouth. I've had people through social media reach out to me and be like, "Hey, you should check out this place and it's cool." So they'll drop a pin or like send a video. Some of it's just like basic places we've always wanted to see, right? So we went to like Olympic National Park, and so we always wanted to go to Olympic, and uh, you know, we wanted to go to the Columbia River Gorge because we had been there years before. Um, we went to upstate New York recently, and we thought, okay, well, we'll definitely want to check out Niagara Falls, but we kind of just pulled up a map and we'd see like networks of roads or hikes and bodies of water, and we kind of just like search them. So there's two different ways. Sometimes we have a place planned out and it's researched, and we've either been there before or like we're understanding where we're going. And other times we kind of just set out in a general direction, or we're in a new area and we try to find something cool. And both of them have proven to bring us to some pretty sweet places.
What are some of the locations you're dreaming about hitting that you haven't had time or maybe the resources to get to yet?
Yeah, international is comes to mind at first. Iceland is a place that we currently have marked for. Iceland, has a rich history of strength sports and just a super diverse landscape where just absolutely beautiful. And I think we'd really like to go there and just kind of experience that space and that culture. Locally, I haven't made it over to the Redwoods or Yosemite over in Northern California. So we talked about those locations. Um, There's also been other international locations that we've talked about, whether that's like Finland or Japan. Um, yeah, we have. It's a common like Cooper family conversation where we're like, oh, we should go here, or oh, we should travel here one day. So, but the most immediate would probably be Iceland is our big next level destination, and then in the States, the next couple plans. I think we're heading to California here soon, and then we'll be up in Oregon again.
Those will be fantastic locations. I'm looking forward to seeing those. And Clay, I really feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't dig in a bit deeper on some of the logistics of transporting and moving the weights. So I
Sure.
just want to dig in a little bit. Like you, I frequently find myself driving around with strength training implements in my vehicle. For me, I always try to keep a loaded Go Ruck in my car so that I can, like, if I go to the playground with the kids, I can do weighted pull-ups or other weighted movements. I always have a TRX in the back of the car.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm traveling with a kettlebell. I don't know about you, but I always have this fear of any strength training implements becoming airborne projectiles in the event of a collision. So I try to ratchet strap stuff down. Like, what do you do to keep everything secure when you're driving? Or am I weird that I'm worrying about this? I don't know.
No, no, I think you're a responsible human being, Andrew. I think that that is a totally practical thing to worry about. Or if anything, it's validating for me because we've had the same thing. So I drive a truck. We started with the Subaru Outback, and we would kind of just put everything in the back and lay the bar over the seats, and we try to tie it down with some straps. With the truck now, there's a process where yeah, we have some bungees and some straps, and basically the barbell goes in a certain way, the weights are stacked this way, and we just make sure it's really secure. So that kind of answers that like concern sometimes of like, oh man, if we got in an accident, is this going to be an issue? So we try to tie things down really well in the back of the truck.
Okay. And then you get to the trail, you have this multi-phase approach and you're rucking everything in. What does that actually look like? Like, how are you loading the plates? Are they going in a pack? The bar is a very awkward implement to transport over a long distance. So like, how does everything get carried and how has your system evolved over time?
Yeah. So I've inherited old ultralight frame bag from my late father-in-law. And so I'll put one of the larger Olympic plates in the frame bag, usually a 55 or a 45, sometimes two of them if I can fit them. And then I'll move it usually in 100 pounds to 145 pounds per trip. And I usually will start with the heaviest phases. So I'll put the 55-pound plate in the bag, and then I'll carry two 45s in my hand. And then I just start hiking or walking. And it's not a time trial. So if my forearms start to scream at me or if I need to rest, I'll stop for a second and just kind of appreciate being out there in the solitude. And then I come back, and usually there's another 145-pound trip, and then it starts to get a little lighter from there as I got moved the 45s or the 55s. So now it's just 45s. Depending on what the working weight is, I can include some 35s. And then usually at the end, I'll bring out the barbell with the one final plate. And how I carry the barbell has evolved. I used to think like, oh, I'll just throw it over my shoulders, but then my shoulders start to scream at me after a while. So yeah, you just kind of do whatever's comfortable. Sometimes it turns into like a makeshift hiking stick, where I like used it to like catapult myself over a few things. But that sounded more athletic than it actually is. I'm not literally catapulting myself. I'm like dragging myself up a mountain with a barbell. But yeah, it's usually about 4 to 6 phases to get to the spot to get all the weight there. So a phase being take the weight there, come back without the weight, and then take the weight there, come back without the weight. You do that probably 4 to 6 times. And then on the way back, I try to replicate the load in. Sometimes I'm a little bit more depleted. So sometimes the way back can take an additional trip or phase.
At this point, you've done hundreds of round trips. I feel like it would be a miracle if you hadn't injured yourself rucking that much weight for that number of trips. Have you been injured?
I haven't injured myself.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, I haven't had any injuries. I mean, there's been times I I had one situation where I had a really terrible muscle cramp, like just an awful muscle cramp that uh, kind of like awoke me to the need to like hydrate better, to be smarter, because I am putting myself out there in a situation where, if I don't take the right precautions, like it could be potentially dangerous. So, no physical injuries other than like a really awful muscle cramp one time, and I have now learned my lesson.
And as you've advanced in the project, what's happened with your anxiety, and how have your interactions with people through social media contributed to whatever is going on with your anxiety?
Yeah, I think that overall, I've noticed, I feel more whole. I certainly feel like I'm more capable to contextualize whatever fears that start to creep in. And if my anxiety starts to spiral, I can step outside of it and kind of name it a little bit to say, like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. And that's not just because of Discovery Deadlift. It's, that's one part of the toolkit. Discovery Deadlift helps because I feel like it's self care in a way, and I'm doing two things I really love, being outside and lifting, but I'm also doing it with the people I love the most, my wife and my kids. So I think that brings some context to my life, but also just therapy, continued therapy. Antidepressants have helped at different times just to be able to um, look at life and try to take things a day or a step at a time, and understand that there are things without, beyond the realm of our immediate control, and there are things within our control. And once you start to make peace with what you can and can't change, it's empowering in a way, because you think like, okay, here's what I can do to be a better person or to do better for other people. And then here's some things that, there's real no virtue in going down that rabbit hole, Clay, because where that leads, and that leads to a lot of anxiety and potential panic attacks, et cetera. So I think that I feel a lot healthier as an individual 3 years later, in terms of not just physically but also mentally and emotionally.
And Clay, it sounds like the project is taking care of a number of things that are proven to improve people's mental health. Number one, you're getting a lot of exercise, which is proven to improve our mental health. Number two, you're doing it in relation to other people that you care about. So like there's a community and family aspect to it, which is also a very important part of mental health. Because you have, you're working a demanding full-time job, you have this project, which sounds like it's a lot of fun. It also takes a lot of time. I don't know about you, but once I became a father, it became much more challenging, particularly as I got older, to like build and maintain friendships. There's just like not a lot of time for that. So I'm curious how you navigate that. Just kind of talking dad to dad here, like what's going on with you and your community or friends outside of your family in this project?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. Actually, I am really lucky in the fact that I grew up with a core group of friends, from a very young age. And we've been able to maintain those relationships. I'm 36 now, into our mid 30s, to the point where, even when we were young, we're like, yeah, I bet our wives will be friends. And, it's like this romanticized thinking, and our wives are now friends and our kids are friends. So, I have a lot of friends that will send me a text message, or they'll be like, "Hey, I saw where you were this weekend. That's awesome." We try to make my friends are very important to me. So yeah, being a father, having a job, doing this project, sometimes time doesn't feel as available. But I think it's just more of a conscious decision where we try to be like, "Hey, we haven't seen these guys for a while. Let's go out to eat, or let's have them come over." But I'm very fortunate in that regard, because my friends feel like family too. So maintaining relationships, sometimes then you have to keep watering that plant. If there has been extended period of time where maybe we haven't like connected, there is just the underlying like trust and understanding that's like, oh, hey, we could go a couple months without saying hi or without actually getting together, but it hasn't materially affected how we feel about each other. And I think that that's born from, again, us knowing each other for decades, and being able to have that level of trust. New friendships or other ones, I certainly could see. Yeah, it'd be a little bit harder. Somebody would be like, "Hey, do you want to go out tonight?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I am in the mountains with the barbell." And they're like, "You are a weirdo, man." So I think My my friends that I've had for a long time understand me.
Do these friends lift?
Yeah, they do. They've actually come with me a couple of times to lift. It's been fun. I think 3 or 4 times they've come with me, and one of them is even he's like, "Hey, let me try filming," and he filmed, and then my other buddy, Jake and Jake, they're both named Jake in particular. They both came. They've come a few times, so they'll listen to this podcast, guys. So there's your shout out. I love you guys. But they've come and they've deadlifted with me. They've also come with me to the gym too, and lifted before.
And through the project, have you met other creators, and what have you learned from them? How have they shaped how you're thinking about what you're doing and what you might want to do in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our mutual connection here with Blake. Blake's favorite band, I think, is The National, and I saw him talking about The National, and that's my favorite band. And I was like, hey, he's also a father, so he's telling these stories about his life, and he has a really beautiful, like, poetic way to kind of contextualize what's going on in his life or talking about difficult things that's happened. So I actually just followed him as a fan and was commenting on the stuff that he was creating, and then ultimately we kind of connected and formed an internet friendship, right? So I think one thing that's been really affirming about Discovery Deadlift is when you put yourself out there, obviously not everyone's going to love it, right? You're going to have folks that are going to come in with this is, what is this? And I think it's been actually really healthy for me to be able to see that stuff and then choose to consider the source, to choose what I am going to invest my, you know, time and attention to listening and ones I'm going to just disregard. So by and large, it's been really, really positive, and I've been able to connect with other like creative people who make stuff that I find inspiring. Blake being one of them. There's been other athletes that we've come across. I had dinner with a guy who was in town, Big Verge, if you listen to this, he was in town for his job, and we went out to eat in Salt Lake City the other night. And again, we met um, through Discovery Deadlift through Instagram, and it's kind of been cool to form these kinds of relationships with folks from different walks of life and different backgrounds and cultures to kind of be bound together by the universal need to like love and be loved and be understood. And yeah, it's been really one of my favorite parts of the whole thing is been connecting with people and like getting different direct messages or else reaching out to people that inspired me. It's made my world feel bigger in a really good way.
And Clay, now that you have all of these reps of rucking, reps with your family, reps of getting out there and pulling the deadlift, reps of calf raises, of course, donkey calf raises, I have to imagine, like the full
Yeah.
suite of toes in, toes out, like the whole deal. In addition to that, you now have hundreds of reps as a creator, creating visual art, creating videos, thinking in this way that's different than you'd engaged your brain before you started this project. What types of projects do you think about now doing in the future? Because you have amassed a massive, very significant size audience. It is all centered around deadlifting and the outdoors and the awesome work you're doing with mental health. But also, you have this platform now and you could probably do a lot of different things. So have you thought beyond the scope of this project to potentially other things you might want to explore?
Yeah, a little bit. We've had different folks reach out for like different type of like docu series or something smaller to just like kind of again that falls in the same line of what we're doing, but to kind of like follow and chronicle what we do with Discovery Deadlift and why. But we've done a couple of deadlift competitions in the community where we've tried to raise money for somebody who's maybe underprivileged or an organization that's doing a lot of good. And that's something that we're looking at again right now is with a larger audience. We're looking at like a deadlift-a-thon or something along those lines where if we could use this opportunity to actually put some good out into the world. The first time we did it, we were raising money for the wildfires that kind of ravaged the United Way in Lane County in Eugene that ravaged that area. And then the second time was again somebody I connected with on Instagram. His name's Jawan. He was starting a business where he's an incredible basketball player, an incredible ball handler, and he does like this at home, uh, ball handling school and teaching. So we did a micro grant, what we call them, where there's an entry to pay, and we had some companies donate prizes. So if you win, you get a prize, and you're also entered into a raffle. But all of the proceeds went to Jalan or went to the United Way to try to again help with the wildfires or help Jalan as he's working on his business. So I think the micro grant program is something that we're feeling passionate about. As we've gotten larger, the logistics of it have gotten a little bit more complex. So we're trying to figure out how to do that, but hopefully try to use whatever platform we have for however long we have it to be candid about, yes, our mental health and my mental health in particular, what I think is important, but also to try to do some good for other people.
That's a fantastic goal, and it's a lot of fun to watch. So, Clay, thanks so much for being here today, and thanks for the content that you're making. It's incredibly inspiring, and I'm really grateful that we got to connect.
Awesome, Andrew. Thanks for the time. I really appreciate it, and I really love your show and what you're doing here.
Thank you. This is Andrew Votz. Thank you for listening to Choose the Hard Way. Sharing is caring. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, hit 5 stars wherever you listen, leave a positive review, and share it with a friend. Sign up for the newsletter at choosethehardway.com to get exclusive stories about the hard way, episode updates, and more. Choose the Hard Way is a Big Truck production. It is produced and edited by Anthony Palmer at Palm Tree Podco. Emily Miles provides digital and marketing support. Jeffrey Nebellini is the creative mastermind behind our brand identity and the Choose the Hard Way logo. The content for this show is created by me, Andrew Votz.